Hi, friends. Welcome back to the library, or welcome to the library. I have with me today author L.A. Barnitz, and I'm super excited to be chatting. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And call me Laura. I just use
Laura.
LA for the writing.
Okay. So, Miss Laura, tell us a little bit about your start with writing and kind of your journey throughout the years.
Well, I think I'm going to, probably say the same thing that almost every writer does. I've
Mm.
written since I was a kid. I've loved writing and just, created my own stories and essays, whatever form it was in, I enjoyed writing. But I wrote um, short stories mainly in college and entered some contests and did pretty well. So I did quite a bit of fiction writing in college. And then, life happens. And I had a degree in journalism. I worked for newspapers and magazines for some time. Then I moved more into general communications and working for nonprofits on various, oriented around various different subjects and issues. So I really left fiction writing for quite a long time, raised my kids, did all that. And then in my late 40s, I knew that I had to get back to it. I mean, it was the only thing, and I always kept journals, that were half journal, half, character sketches, what have you.
Yeah.
Um, I always kept those, and I knew by my late 40s, I was like, I really need to get back to this because this is really where my passion is. So, on my 50th birthday, I told my friends that I had started a novel. I had an idea for a novel and I was going to see it through if it was the last thing I ever did. And I did. And it just took me,
Yay.
10 years. But this summer, yeah, my first novel, epic fantasy, was published in June. And it's called The Stonebound Heir.
Yes, it looks really interesting. I have my TBR, as most readers, is Death by TBR is extremely long. It's there and it's up soon.
I
But I was
understand.
looking. I was perusing through some of your socials, looking at the Stonebound Heir, and I did see that you said some of your travels inspired this story, and so I was really interested to kind of get the story behind the inspiration.
Oh, okay, okay. Well, yes. I mean, I have traveled quite a bit for
Mhm.
work over the years and while I was studying. And when I was in college, I was a student in India for about 6 months, and that
Okay.
really changed my life. I love India. It is my second home. I adore it. It's a fascinating part of the world, very rich culturally, as
Yeah.
everybody knows who's paid any attention to India at all.
Mhm.
But it inspired me greatly. I just felt so at home there. And then my husband, who happens to be Indian, I actually met him at the University of Missouri. So come on. But anyway, he is Indian, and he was assigned um, to he was based in India. He worked for the FDA and he was starting
Mhm.
the US FDA office in India. So we lived there as a family for 5 years with our youngest daughter and with our oldest daughter for a short time. So I had plenty of opportunity to explore India more when I was there. We lived in Delhi, but I worked on global health projects. So I was
Mhm.
in more remote areas of India, and I loved every second of it. So these characters in the book, right? So I had the
Mhm.
ideas for the characters before, we moved back to India. And they weren't Indian, I just had ideas for characters.
Okay.
But when I was there and busy exploring, ancient forts and palaces, I was like, oh, this is the world where they live. This is the color of
Mm.
their world. So that really did inspire me. and a couple of forts in particular, Chittorgarh and Gwalior. If you have ever, been to India or you ever go to India, they are amazing, amazing medieval forts. And so many stories surround these places. They're so beautiful and fascinating. They really did inspire the rock, which is central to the Stonebound Heir.
Mm-hmm. So when you started writing the Stonebound Heir, did you know from the beginning that it was going to be like a more than one situation and you were just trying to figure out how many? Or did you think it was just going to be, I love to ask this because they're like, sometimes they start off as one story and then it's like, I can't finish it in one book.
Yeah. No, I knew that it would take me more than one book. I was praying for a duology, praying for it, but no, it's going to be 3. It's going to be 3 books.
Yeah. So your character started kind of before then, and you said it was partially in your journal that was like, just pieces of characters. Do you find that a lot of those come intrinsically, as far as like motivations for who they are, how they speak, their person in whole, or do you also take from outside influences as well when it comes to like basing an actual character?
I think that my writing style is very intuitive. I really try to just follow those characters, put them in a landscape and follow them a little bit to learn who they are.
Okay.
And so I wasn't really drawing on anything else, except, visually, I kind of had in mind, for the character Ling Li, who's one of the main characters, I had a visual for her. For the others, they just really grew out of their activities as I was sketching things out.
Yeah. So, how the trajectory for your trilogy, how do you feel, how much of that is weighed in like is it just going to be solely based on your travels to India? Or because you said you've traveled a lot, do you feel like there are influences from other places as well?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for the cultural and kind of visual setting of the trilogy, it is definitely South Asian and Persian influenced. So, definitely some Persian influences as well. And I've tried to bring in a little hint and bits and pieces maybe from that would resonate with other cultures. There's a little bit of Russian, influence in there, not much, but those are primarily kind of cultural influences. But I think that the emotive side of the story is and the kind of the I don't know, the texture of the story is at times it feels to me almost like a Western. And I don't know why. I don't know why that happened, but I definitely get that vibe as well.
Yeah, and I can tell from your travels that just from what you're mentioning, a lot of the places that it seems you've been have had rich culture. And so I could completely understand how that would be an influence, because when you go to places like that, in comparison to the United States, like we're a melting pot, and there are a lot of places that you can get hints of those culture, but maybe not like a full immersion situation. And when you get to travel to those places and you're immersed in the homeland of that culture and where it began, it's like kind of having the curtains pulled back. Like you really get to see how the people interact with one another, because they're removed if you get a piece of that. Like we always have some version of a Chinatown,
right,
that kind of thing in the US and in certain places. But when you're there, you get to see how they interact with one another in their homeland, and the respect that they have for one another and the culture and all of that. And sometimes that stuff is a little removed when you're not in the land.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that for me, it's the voices of the characters. The words that they choose. Of course, that has to do with their position socially in the world that you create. But the words that they choose, the way they speak to one another, the kind of reference points that they have, and that was a big struggle with me at first, because when I got it into my head, you are writing an epic fantasy novel, I found myself kind of sliding back into very traditional tropes, and very traditional what you see in a lot of epic fantasies that are Europe, based culturally. And I'm like, no, 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 straighten. This has got to change. So that was a challenge, and I'm not, I would never ever say that I'm reproducing, medieval Indian culture. That's impossible. It's not, and it's not my intent either. I mean, this is a fantastic world, and it looks something like medieval India. But these characters have to have their own relationships too, and their own way of being.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me a little bit about, you said it took you 10 years to write.
It's horrifying, yes.
Well, everybody has their journey, and it's okay. You're not the first person to tell me it took them more than 5 years to write a book, and I understand it because, I mean, life happens. Things get in the way, and a lot of people have kids during that time and other things going on. But I'm looking more of like the I guess my question would be, when you finally finished and you got to the end of that 10 years and you realized that you had gotten to a point you were ready to publish, was it like an aha moment, or were you like slowly coming up the hill the entire time, like it's sitting with you?
Felt like it was coming up the hill, like a very steep, long hill. Yeah. I mean, I knew. I mean, there's so many scenes, so many chapters that are not in this book, that I had written and that I loved. I loved them so much, and it was so painful to get rid of them. But to hold the story together, and it had to take its final form. It took a while. I would say, that the story was done about the 7th or 8th year, but I was like, well, I still had to go through beta readers and all the process that you go through to prepare a book. And so that did take me some time as well. I guess because I'm an Indian author and this is my first book and I don't know what I'm doing. And so, I really had to kind of feel my way through that.
Yeah, yeah. So I did read that you started your press. Tell me about your decision to go into that a little bit.
Well, I'm not, I've not done much with that yet, but my real hope is to encourage other writers from my home state of Missouri and the Midwest in general, to try to be a helpful resource to them. If they want to write fiction, because it's so hard to find those supports and to find people who have had some kind of a similar life experience, and to just, hopefully help people build the confidence. I mean, I spoke at the library that I had used as a small child, and I was very, very excited to do that, because it's so hard to find people in our more, remote areas of the country who can support that. And I know it's just been, writing and reading has been so important to me. So I want to encourage others.
Yeah. When you got ready to start the press, what did that look like as far as like trying to decide, printing and that sort of thing?
Well, I'm not at this point. I'm not
Uh,
doing any printing. I
okay.
mean, I hope that will happen in
Yeah.
future. At this point, though, I really am just focusing on trying to encourage individuals and explain kind of the hurdles and the steps that they need to go through, because very few people, when they have an idea for a book, they haven't been part of a literary community, particularly beyond maybe their book club.
Mhm.
They're trying to figure out what those steps are. So at this point, I'm more of a counselor than a press, but
Gotcha.
that's what's
Steps
happening now.
everywhere. It happens,
Steps everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just sometimes it takes little steps starting to just put yourself out there. That's one thing um, that I have struggled with a bit, especially when it comes to this, as far as like putting myself out there and recognizing that, like, I know this helps many people. And it is a lot of fun to sit here and listen to people talk and talk about books and the things that they've written and the things that they've read and all over the place.
Yeah.
But when it comes to actually marketing, the same goes for when you're marketing your book. You're so proud of this thing that you've created and that you've done, and you want to talk about it all the time. But then for me, there is also this slight fear of like, are people going to think I'm annoying because this is all I talk about? Or,
Oh my God. Yeah.
is somebody going to go in and listen or read this little excerpt that I put on here and think that it's absolutely stupid and the worst thing they've ever read or listened to? And those fears are compounded over the many authors that I've talked to, between self-publishing, publishing with small press, doing a hybrid, and even people like yourself who have queried 50 to 100 or more times with big presses, and somebody who had an agent and has been through that situation. That fear is real for everyone.
Yeah.
And especially when you have a creative mind, and yourself, it took you 10 years to write this book. And while it didn't take me 10 years to get to this podcast, it's still one of those, like, the fear of creating something and then feeling as if maybe it's not good enough, or etc.
Yeah.
That holds a lot of people back.
It does. It does. And I think, I heard some or saw somebody comment on this recently about this very issue of,
Mm.
well, I finally published a book, and I haven't heard anything from anybody. Nobody will. I can
Yeah.
get reviews, whatever it is, right? But
Mhm.
I think that the important thing is, as a creative person, is to know that you have done your best, and that
Mhm.
your best won't be the same as your best tomorrow, and that's okay. But that you absolutely put out the best work that you could put out, and that you are pleased with what you were able to do at the time, even if nobody else ever looks at it. You're going to,
Mhm.
if you are a creative person and you have to do this, then you will go on and you will do, even more the next time.
Yeah.
But it has to satisfy you. You're the only person that it has to satisfy in the end. And you have to remember that. Not That's very, very difficult to say to somebody who wants to
Yeah.
make a career of writing, who wants to make a support their family, support themselves. That
Mhm.
is an incredible risk. I think I would have been immobilized and completely incapable of writing if I had had that kind of pressure on me.
Yeah.
Um, and that's probably why I did not start until I was near the end of my career and could say comfortably, okay, now I can do this. And what
Mhm.
happens, happens. The chips will fall where they may.
Yeah. And I mean, sometimes you're not the only one who has decided to publish later in life, and that's okay. That's
Mm-hmm.
okay. There are plenty of people who do the same and still do amazing. You're doing amazing, by the way.
Oh.
And I feel as though, okay, the market is flooded. And there's no surprise by that, especially since 2020 and post COVID, and the market is flooded.
Yeah.
Everybody who is creative or was able to tap into their creative during that time has started writing and really run off with it. And we're at the point in society where children of the young age nowadays are not reading as much. And it's a little sad to see, but the more we flood the market, the more there is available.
That's right.
And that's a good thing. We want to drive kids back into, even though a lot of the things I read are not intellectually based, we're going to say we want to drive them back into the intellectually based world.
Oh boy, I hope so. I mean, I really, there's still kids out there who read and really love it,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, they are.
they fall into the work that they love that's shaping them. But I think of all the kids who are um, not doing that and not being shaped by anything doesn't mean that you have to be such a great reader that you aspire to be a writer and that's your life ahead. It doesn't mean that at all, but I feel like everybody needs those touchstones early in life. And it could be visually, it could be visual art, it can be the written word, it can be so many different things. But when I think about kind of the environment that kids are in right now, where they're being overstimulated visually, but nothing lasts.
Yeah.
So nothing is retained. So I just, that really worries me. Yeah.
Me too. So, on the topic of this, because here recently I have been looking at more, I have a young cousin who's in her primitive teenage years. She's like 12, 13, and she's been looking at more. She's very much a fantasy girly, and I'm trying to, I'm like, I'm so encouraging this. I'm so encouraging this, and this is exciting, but also I know what's on my bookshelves, and so I'm like, okay, so maybe you should just stick away from these.
Yes, I had that same experience. My niece, who's a full-grown woman who has two boys who are 14 years old, just turned 14. She said, "Oh, well, I'm going to get, your book for the boys." I'm like, "Well, I would love for them to read it, and I believe that they are quite mature enough to handle this book, but I am telling you as a parent, that there are some suggestive scenes, nothing, I'm not heavy. There's no heavy spice in this book. There's very little spice in this book. But I said, just so you understand that is there. I mean, this book was not written for the young child by any means.
Right.
So she's like, "Oh, okay. So let me look at it first, and then she was fine with it. And I was like, "Okay, fine. I feel good.
Yeah.
I feel good about that." But I didn't want to say, "Okay, just go for it."
Yeah. My situation is, my young cousin is actually living with my dad and my stepmom, and neither of them are big readers. So they know reading is a huge portion of my life, and they'll come to me and they'll be like, "Hey, what do you think about Cassandra Clare?" And I'm like, that's appropriate. That's okay. I'm like, they're telling me she wants to read like Katie Robert, and I'm like, no, absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I'm just thinking at that age, I was reading like, I was still like dabbling in Junie B. Jones and The Magic Treehouse and what is I just talked about the Saber-Tooth Tiger series and the Warrior series, and it's about animals who have human abilities. That's where I was, and I'm just like, what is she trying to do?
Well, I was a very precocious reader. I read so many things that I was not prepared for, and my parents were both readers, especially my dad, and read everything under the sun. So that library was always open to me all the time. and I picked up some things and read them that I would have never told my parents that I was reading, of course, but I'm okay with that. If a
Yeah,
child is going to do that, they're trying to figure out the world. They're trying to figure out their place. I'm okay with that, but I would not encourage that
for
necessarily.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what my dad was talking to my younger cousin, because I was like, there are things like Agatha Frost, and the likes of her and her companions who write 200-page mystery novels
Mm-hmm.
that are a bit on the adult side, but it's enough to where like you see real character development through like 28
Mm-hmm.
shorter novels that give you life lessons. Like, yes, it's a murder mystery, but
Right.
there are a lot of things where like the main female character is taking in a homeless kid and it's helping to raise her and teach her the right and wrongs and the responsibilities of your actions. And there is a hint at some romance, but it's so far, I'm like 4 or 5 books into 28. So I could be wrong later on in the series, but
Uh-huh.
so far it's very much of like a platonic, but also at the same time romantic between her and the male main character. Like there are some hints of some things, but it's never anything indescriptive as some of the other things I have read.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that the main thing, is just to capture their imaginations if possible. The main
Yeah,
thing is and to encourage. There's such a rich amount of literature available to them
absolutely.
that there are things that hopefully are going to resonate with them and that are where their minds are at that point and what they're ready for. So yeah, I mean, I've never totally outgrown my animal story
Oh
love,
no.
obviously, because I have animal companions in this novel and more in the next novel. And so I'm like, well, yeah, okay, that's still there. It doesn't matter.
I think if I had the chance to reread that Warrior series, I would probably lose it. I would probably lose my mind in falling back into my young teen ways. There's just a certain level of like excitement that you get from those stories.
Yeah.
Authors like yourself who write epic fantasy and those things, you guys have such a way of world building and descriptive wording that just really immerses a reader into the story, and you get a tactile feeling with that.
That's the
And
goal.
it's one of those that sit with you for a long time.
Yeah. Hopefully, if you've done it well, it will.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, but I think back to, books that influenced me so greatly. And, one of them, which I will never, ever let go of, through my hot, sweaty little hands, is Rudyard Kipling's The Jungle Book stories. And not the Jungle Book of Disney, but his actual novel, which I found on my grandparents' bookshelves when I was, 11, 12 or so. Oh my God, those books that collection of stories blew my mind. I will never, ever recover from that. And to this day, I have that old copy, that edition, and it's my go-to. I love it so much.
That's good to know. Do you feel like your reading as a child in that fantasy world is what drove you to write fantasy?
Probably. Yes.
Probably.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, it's my own, excessively romantic and exaggerated nature, no doubt. But those books were so inspirational, and some of them for the content, like Kipling. Some of them for the illustration, for the art. I had a beautiful, beautiful copy of The Snow Queen and Other Tales as a child that was drawn by this, the illustrations were by this French artist, Adrien Segur. And oh my God, I never recovered from that book either. I mean, this, not only did it have the Snow Queen, but the Nutcracker and several shorter stories that I never read anywhere else. Jorinda and Jorangle, I believe it is. It's a Brothers Grimm story. And Alenka and her brother was another story, The Little Sister of the Sun. And those illustrations, I mean, to this day, I can see them, and they're so beautiful. And I mean, that sticks with you, and that inspires your imagination in so many ways later when you have many other experiences in life.
Yeah, for sure. And that's, I feel like those sort of influences, when you get them later in life, you not necessarily get them later in life, but when they stay with you until later in life, the way that they form you as a person and how your creativity shows. Because for me, I am an ADHDer, so I have many hobbies that I have picked up and since put down. It is just the way that it is. And my creativity can show itself in many ways. So yours shows itself in writing, and I'm sure there are others as well, but the most formative that we know of currently, writing. For me, it really depends on the month, but I can paint. I can write, which I choose not to do very often because I don't want to get completely sucked in. I am for the tea, but I am also partly just not ready yet. I am a scrapbooker. I like to color, same as I like to paint, and I also really like photography. So,
sister, you speak my language.
I'm just like, look at all the ways your creativity can come out. And there are so many other things as well. Like, there are many different facets with photography. There are many different facets with painting. You could be a sculptor as well.
Right.
And you never know how and nowadays you could end up in marketing, like media marketing.
Yeah. Although I feel that that's the surest way to kill yourself. I
would have to agree.
I worked for many years in communications, and I enjoyed it. I loved my work, but there were times where I was like, oh my gosh, just having to creatively put this message out into these very ephemeral, temporary media and ways of communicating it to a particular audience. It just burned me out so badly. But I think it's wonderful. People who do it well are very important. So I don't denigrate it. But for me, it was just like too much stimulation and having to change so quickly and to reorient so quickly that I never felt like I truly, conveyed what I wanted to convey. I didn't have time for that. I had to just keep moving with the tide,
I feel like media marketing and communications as such is probably one of the things that authors struggle with the most. And it's not just for the sake of like saying they can't do it, but a lot of the times you're reposting a lot of the same information. You're just regurgitating, over and over again, the same information in a different way, trying to reach a new set of people. And especially when you're in your first 5 books that you've written, it's very easy for that fear that we were talking about prior of, are they going to get tired of hearing the same thing over and over again? Are they going to get tired of seeing my posts I mean,
Yes.
that it's so easy for it to sit in that, especially considering social media is not all that helpful with the algorithms that they've come through. And if anybody who works for Instagram can hear me, let me just say, send my posts to my followers again, please. Actually, send them to my followers. Why do I have this really large platform of 3,500 people and I get 10 or 15 likes when I post?
It's just
so
mind-boggling.
irritating.
It is. And I am of the age where I am not a digital native. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
No. So every bit of it is a struggle for me to learn, master, come up with. All right. So given that, right. So, I mean, I think I'm agreeing with you 100%. I'm like, what in the world? Like, holy mackerel. I will talk to people who are like, I'm just so tired of like advertising this, blah, 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 blah. And they're like, oh, I didn't see that. I'm like, oh my God. It's just like, this is just too much, so I have really I'm really trying to calm myself down on the marketing front. And also from the standpoint that the Stonebound Heir is the first book in the trilogy. I'm like, okay, it's out there, fine. Like, I do want people to find it. I do want people to read it for sure. But let's calm down here because it's going to be out there for a very long time. And I need to write the next novel. And to do that, I cannot be, fussing around with Instagram every 3 seconds. That cannot happen. So, yeah.
And that's the thing is I've said this quite a few times to many authors. Know that you are not alone in your struggles with any social media, because anybody who is working social media and who is trying to promote books, whether they're an influencer or a reader or an author, the algorithm is not friendly. It's just not. And everybody has something that's going to work for them. For me, in the past, it has been getting into the little engagement groups. The only way that I can get people who follow me to start seeing what I'm posting is to get into an engagement group that has a few of my followers and a few non-followers. And then after it starts getting some traction from there, others start to see it. But that's a week and a half later that the rest of my followers start to see that. I mean, and that's normal. And that's just like the aspect of numbers itself when you're looking at Instagram alone is an issue. But when you're looking at something like TikTok, which I have no nice words for TikTok, but I say this frequently, the amount of numbers, say it's 100 people that you get views or likes between whichever post you're getting. 100 people doesn't seem like a lot in the grand scheme of how many people use social media and such. But when you're standing in a room full of 100 people, it's a lot of people. It can be really overwhelming. And each video or post that you've got, if it reaches, you're not guaranteeing you're reaching the same 100 people every time. So you're reaching more than you think you are. And sometimes the best thing about our community, the book community, is that you're going to get, say you get 50 likes on a post that has no real tags but you add like some music, and maybe you get a couple shares. So the best thing about this is that if somebody shares it to your story, well, one, you're not seeing the 50 to 100 people that watch that person's story. So there's more exposure. And then who's to say that I don't see your post organically on my Instagram and I like it to give it a boost, to make sure that I'm interacting and I comment and then I share on my story. So you get that algorithm boost from me and my interaction. And then I go and read it and put it in my Discord chat that's got 500 people in it and say, oh my gosh, guys, you would never believe about this epic fantasy story that I just found. I'm putting it on my TBR. We're going to read it in the next couple days. It's going to go on my bingo card, because we have a lot of things going on in our Discord. And then I write a review about it, and I'm like, you would never believe the interesting story I just read. And then 500 people are looking at it again.
Yeah.
You're not seeing that. And the word of mouth has always been the biggest business booster since the beginning of time. Word of mouth has been it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I wish that there was a way I could figure out, how to contact book clubs. I really do wish I could figure that out. Like just, a global spread of book clubs. How do I get to those people? Because, it's so much about people talking to people and being just like, oh, this is it. This is what you need. And I try to do that. I try to do that for authors whose works I've really loved, online. Like when I see some random post on Threads, give me a recommendation for your best horror novel. I have my go-tos. I am like, I will promote you until the day I die because that book was so good. So I will do that.
Yeah, 100%. And I feel like everybody has those people where they constantly are just like, oh my gosh, yes, this author. But don't forget about the people, maybe you read their book a couple months ago, and like, cause I get this all the time. I read a lot. I read a lot. I looked at the numbers the last time I was having a conversation with somebody about this a couple of days ago. And I was like, in the last 2 years, I've read nearly 700 books.
Oh my God. Wow. That's a lot of books.
Oh my gosh. Like I didn't even realize it, but I'm devouring them between arcs and the stuff that I have in my actual, I believe at this point we can call it a library. I'm not 900 or 1,000 strong, but this room has been dedicated to my books. So it is my library.
That's right.
At these, and then the stuff that are on my Kindle that I read, and I'm just like, I can't forget about, Daphne Elliott, okay, for example. I'm on her team, and she writes contemporary, spicy lumberjack romance. And first of all, if you have not read a lumberjack romance, I highly recommend.
Okay.
She's an amazing writer. And one of her, dare I say, main characters is actually a giant moose that likes to cause issues around the town for people. And he's just a general, like, give no Fs. Like, I do what I want. You can't touch me. You're not bothering me. I don't like you. I'll do what I want type of character. Okay. Absolutely 100% probably my favorite character I have ever read. Because
now, wait a minute, is this a moose, or is this like a fantastic moose, like an intelligent moose character?
He's an intelligent character. And in the beginning, he just seems like he's just a moose. Like in the first book, he just seems like a moose. He gets tampons thrown at him because he doesn't want to move out of the way. But as the next 3 or so books go on, she's got 4 for one family and then 4 for another family. And it's all centered around this town that is a logging town in Maine. Okay. So multiple series about this, essentially about this conglomerate of logging families that has an underlying mystery theme of the first 4 books is like, was our dad involved in a trucking accident or was he offed? And then the next 4 is like, our dad was low-key a drug runner and now we're having to get rid of our family business or try to salvage it, or because the FBI has been investigating us and our family and all that because of our dad's wrongdoings. And so underlying the entire time, but the moose shows up in all 4 of the first families and in the second families. And why I say all of this to say, probably my favorite character I've ever read, just because of how she continues to have him in every story in some way, form, or fashion. And he's just like, I don't really care about you. I'm going to do what I want. But I probably forget to recommend her stuff outside of ARC reading weekly. Just because while he is one of my favorite characters and he sits with me always, I am also highly aware that, like, I read a lot of dark romance, dark fantasy, epic fantasy, that kind of thing. And so a lot of the time what ends up on my page is those things. And I talk about those things. And it's not that the contemporary romance doesn't hold a piece of my heart, but because the fantasy, the dark fantasy, the epic fantasy, all of that is world building, so fantastical, very immersive, and it just holds my brain. They just stick with me a little bit more. They're a little bit stronger.
Yep. Well, I mean, it's a matter of remembering who's looking for the recommendation, right? Where they are. And then also remembering that, we all have different moods. There will, there are days when all I can think, all I want to read is horror. And then there are days when, I'm in the mood for like a lighthearted romance or a family's, the story of a family's dissolution or, coming back together, or we all have different moods too, and it is hard to switch sometimes from where you are, and you have to remember who is the person, what are they looking for, who are you talking to.
Yeah for sure. And I feel like so actually I'm going to phrase this a different way. When we're talking about recommending your story, The Stonebound Heir, what are some of the stories that you feel like in the market that you would say, if you liked this book, try mine?
Yeah, that's a really hard one for me, really hard, because there's a couple of different ways to go at it. Like, if you are just, you are an epic fantasy reader and you want to read immersive worlds, then I could say, if you like John Gwynne, you like Malice and his various series of books, right? You might really like this because it's that level and that complexity. And I have a whole character list at the end of the first book because there's so many of them to try to keep straight, so you might really be into this. But then again, a lot of people who are epic fantasy readers are very much in that kind of European traditional epic story mode. And so this may throw them because it's in a very different kind of world. So then I will say, maybe it's City of Brass, maybe it's one of the authors who is writing, from an South Asian Indian kind of atmosphere, and you will enjoy that. Or, if what I do have to, I try to say all the time when I'm talking about the book is the Stonebound Heir is less questy and more about that, falling down that mountainside from friendship to betrayal and coming out the other side. So it's more about the relationships of the characters than it is about, looking for the Holy Grail. And so I, try to get that across to people. So trying to compare it, it's always a real challenge for me, a huge challenge. Sometimes, I meet people who their extent or their interest in reading fantasy is maybe they liked Harry Potter as a child, or as a kid. And so I will say, well, if you take the scale between Harry Potter and Game of Thrones, the Stonebound Heir is somewhere in between those two. So go there. Yeah. But that's a tough one. That's a really tough one.
I, it feels wrong to ask, but a lot of the times that's how we end up finding new stories. It's like I'm looking for something that's similar to what I just read because this was something that I easily devoured and something that I want to continue reading. You know,
Yep.
I have always been that way of like if you really enjoyed Katie Robert, try Harley LaRoe. It's got a spin of that paranormal kind of situation. And if you're looking for a less paranormal, but you still want a Edge of Darkness type thing, you're looking for like a Penelope Douglas or maybe some of H.G. Carlton's works are not as heavy as Haunting and Hunting, that kind of thing. Like,
Right.
I'm not saying one is any greater than the other, but that comparison feels bad in nature when it comes to these things because I'm like, I don't think this one was as good as this one. And that's not necessarily what I'm saying. But that's become a really popular trend as well, is like if you liked Tracy Wolfe, as problematic as she has become, or if you liked Harry Potter, or if you try Sarah J. Maas, and you've got this a little bit more of a fantasy aspect, nearing an epic fantasy, but there is a little bit of a like an overall multiverse situation. So
yeah, I mean, it's just finding the way to make those connections to the reader, right?
Absolutely.
It's just trying to being able to parse out those strengths of each story and trying to give them that to hang on to. I mean, I think that's probably the best you can do because everybody's coming to it with a different set of expectations. So
for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I want to ask a little bit about when it came to you writing. Are you a plot liner or are you a pantser?
A solid pantser, my God. It's so bad. That's like it's very funny because in my real life, in my in my family dynamic, my kids relate to me as like the organizer and the bringer of order. But in my own writing life, and that's why partly that it took me forever to write the story, is that I just have to let them tell me what they want to tell me and do what they want to do for a while. Now, that's not to say that I do not believe in outlines and plot, because once I know who those characters are, I'm like, okay, now we need a plot. For God's sake, a plot. Do not bore me with a story that has no plot. That is the surest way for me to put the book down. So yeah, I mean, I think that I start out as a pantser and I get a little more plotty as I go along, because I really do think it's important. But
Yeah.
I'm definitely, I can't start that way.
Well, and I feel like it might be helpful, like once you get a few scenes in and you kind of get a feel for what's going on, I feel like you can kind of get a better grasp of like overall, okay, where do we want to end? Where's going to be like our middle point? And then like what do I find that's important that needs to go into the story? Because as I've said before, if anybody who is listening, again, I'm sorry, I tend to repeat myself between talking to different authors, but we're very much in a model of every story, whether or not you can tell it when you're reading it, and whether or not it's a series or an individual novel, there is a high point in the book you're reading and then in the overall series, if it is a series. So there is a high. And every character goes through their depths of emotion, but there is that climax of the story. And there is the events that lead up to it, like you're going up a mountain and then you hit your climax. And sometimes that trajectory up is not always baseline up. It's up and then a little bit down and then up again. And the same thing with going down. Sometimes it's down and then it goes a little bit back up to another miniature climax, not quite as behind it as the main one. But there is this overarching hill And I feel like especially for our pantsers, once you've kind of got maybe you don't actually write it down, but once you've gotten into your pantsing and you're kind of seeing the scenes, when you go to put them together, you have an idea of, okay, this piece is more of post-climax, or this piece is more of pre-climax.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we need this to happen before it goes to the height of the story.
Mm-hmm.
So in some way, I feel like everybody is a plotter, just maybe not a plotter from the very beginning.
Yes. I mean, you have to be somewhat. Yes, you're absolutely right before you can end it, or otherwise you just have chaos. I mean, they're all doing what they want to do. And what I did in this first novel and will happen in the next two is I have multiple main characters. I have multiple perspectives.
Yeah.
So I'm always trying to balance out, if one person's on the ascension here, the other one's got to be headed to the gutter. And then we've got to reverse it at another point so that each of those perspectives stays fresh and interesting and unexpected. So you do get into the mechanical thinking of how to structure the novel as you move along, and you kind of know, okay, well, this is where this one goes down. There's just no way around that. So we've got to work on what's happening with the other characters here to be a little bit more upbeat, so that we don't get so depressed we put the book down.
Yeah.
Anyway. Yeah.
For sure. So now I have a couple other related but unrelated questions. One being, have you ever wanted to write something, or do you have any ideas for what you would want to write, something outside of epic fantasy?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I love, and I've always wondered about this, right? How writers get known or become known for something, for a particular genre, and you're like, oh, they can never write anything else. I'm like, well, who can do that? I mean, I just don't know that I could only write one thing. But right now, right at this moment as we speak, I have done like half of a horror novella that's available to my newsletter subscribers. So if you're there, then you can get it for free. And I tell them, in each, the last issue of the newsletter, I'm like, I'm waiting to hear back from you guys on this. And then once I've got your feedback, I'm probably going to change the whole thing and rewrite it. But you get it first, right? So yes, I love horror. I love scary stuff. So I definitely want to try that a little bit more seriously. And I have in the back of my mind also, but I can't even begin to touch it until this trilogy is done. But in the back of my mind, I have a more dystopian novel, but set in the real world and contemporary times, and set in the U.S. Of a story of a mother and daughter trying to deal with a dystopian situation. So, yeah, I mean, I definitely want to try other things as well. But I do love fantasy, so it's always going to be there.
Rightfully so. Rightfully so. That was kind of my next question, was like, post trilogy, did you have any plans to start somewhere? Do you think you'll go with that horror?
I don't know. I at this point I can't tell, because I think that the horror piece will be a set of stories, a collection of stories.
Ooh, that'll be fun.
All set around the same location, the same place, but different times and different characters. And the dystopian novel, I love the idea of it, but I don't know yet how that one's going to end. So I can't commit to it yet.
Rightfully so. Rightfully so. I feel like it's one of those, currently you're still deep in the throes of the trilogy. And I'm just picking your brain. I like to pick people's brains. It's one of my things to do, because some authors are like, I mean, sometimes I have this one-off story that I think I might want to write one day, but I'm not really sure if I'm actually going to do it. And then some are like, I've dabbled between genres. And I had one author tell me that historical fiction was the novel that she wrote was probably one of the hardest because of the amount of research that it went into it. And I was just like, I will bow to you because I could not imagine.
Sure. For sure. I am amazed by people who are able to do that, because I will spend half of a day trying to determine the color of somebody's cape. I mean, I can't, the amount of effort and time that goes into historical fiction just blows my mind. My hat's off to them.
Yeah, for sure. Do you have kind of a trajectory? Ooh, words. For your release for the next two for your trilogy?
The book number 2, I am aiming for 2026. So I'm giving myself a year to try to get refined, and I'm hoping and praying that I've gotten a little bit better about the whole editing process. So I can move faster.
Oh gosh.
It takes so long. So I'm hoping 2026. And then I'm not ready to commit to the third one yet because there's still so much to do on that one. I really admire people who are like, well, I've got, I didn't even release my first book until my third one was done. And I'm just like, God, I would be 150 years old. I can't wait that long. So no, it has to go now. But yes, I don't know about the third, but I'm going to, again, as everything gets clearer and clearer as we get into the story. So I'm hoping that it will not take me too much longer to finish it.
Yeah. So. The joys of editing.
Oh my gosh. Oh. Brother, I tell you. Well, I mean, I found a very, very good editor who gave me excellent advice in terms of doing the overview and kind of the macro level. It was just invaluable to me. That was very, very important. I also had a great proofreader who saved me, who absolutely saved my butt on one character's name, which I will not tell you who it was or what now, but let's just say that the name could have been construed as a rather smutty, phrase used in today's language. And I'm like, what? Oh my God, no. And I had to totally change that. So, that was wonderful. So I have had the opportunity to work with really, really great people who have helped me so much. And I have to do this shout out. I really do. So if you are reading if you ever happen to be reading the acknowledgments in my book, I do this thank you to the students in astrophysics at the University of Colorado Boulder. And why? Again, this is why I can't write historical fiction, because reality is so difficult for me. But why? Because this world that the Stonebound Heir takes place in has 2 moons. And this is a critically important fact, and more so in books 2 and 3 than the first one. But I contacted a professor in this program, and I'm like, I need somebody to tell me what is going to happen with 2 moons, and this particular thing is happening. So I had these 2 graduate students from Colorado who got on the phone with me and pulled up the whiteboard and diagrammed things for me about what would happen physically in such a situation. And I'm just like, praise be. Thank you so much. So,
that's a really unique experience.
It was. And I was so grateful to them. And some of the things that I was trying to do worked, and that was great. And some of the things didn't. So I was like, okay, well, now let's just, I love the fantastic world. Don't get me wrong. I don't think that, we should put hard and fast limitations on what you can do in fantasy, but I did want it to be more realistic. And so that was a tremendous help. Tremendous.
Rightfully so. Wow. I have never had an experience with someone saying that they've been able to do that. That's really cool. And I know people have sensitivity readers and things like that, but um the science behind it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Listen,
Absolutely.
science is not my thing. So
I love scientific things, but I have no training in it.
oh,
So
you got
I'm
muted.
completely an idiot, and I'm astounded by everything that really does happen in the world. So I cannot thank those students enough for giving me their sweet time to, say, nope, that is not going to happen. And I'm like, okay, crap. Yeah, I tell you, it was a fantastic thing to talk with those students. So anyway.
I'll make sure to get all of your information from you. We'll put it in the show notes so that everybody listening can know where to get a copy of your book and what's coming up, where to follow you so they can get all of the latest information. And don't forget to go join the newsletter so you can get the in and out of that horror novella.
I
People.
will. I will share all of that with you. And yes, I would love for more people to join that newsletter and get their free horror novella. And what is it about? I'm not going to tell you, except that it's a ghost story and it's a monster story, and you'll just have to find out.
Alrighty. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, this has been such a pleasure, Natalie. I appreciate it so much. And I'm looking forward to hearing more from you and listening to more of the authors who you have been interviewing. I've been going back through the stacks, and I can't wait for more.
Thank you. You have a good day.
Okay, you too. Bye-bye.